Ilara stared at the glowing screen, the numbers on her credit card statement mocking her late-night despair. Each digit was a link in an invisible chain, tightening around her future. Across the screen, a stark, ancient truth whispered, "The borrower is slave to the lender." The city bustled around Ilara, a symphony of commerce and hurried lives. She moved through it like a ghost, past glittering shop windows she couldn't afford to glance at, past cafes where she only bought the cheapest drip. Credit card ads plastered every surface, promising instant gratification, boundless possibility. She bought that 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 she bought. Each swipe, each online click, each loan application had promised liberation, a shortcut to the life she desired. Instead, they had built a cage, invisible yet unyielding, binding her to monthly payments and minimums. "Is this freedom?" she whispered to herself, the question lost in the urban din. "Or just a more comfortable kind of captivity?" The scent of aged paper and warm tea filled Professor Eris's cluttered university office, a sanctuary of forgotten wisdom. Ilara perched on a stack of ancient texts, nervously recounting her financial woes. "It's suffocating, Professor. I saw this quote online. The borrower is slave to the lender. It hit me. It felt so real, so unsettling." Aris, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners, nodded slowly. Proverbs chapter 22, verse 7. A truth as old as time, Ilara. But its implications stretch far beyond your personal balance sheet. It's not merely a financial observation. It's a profound declaration about power, control, and the very fabric of human existence. The Bible, you see, speaks of these invisible chains with terrifying clarity. Ilara leaned forward, a flicker of something beyond despair in her gaze. Professor Eris rose, gesturing toward a faded world map hanging behind his desk. "Consider this, Ilara. If the individual borrower is slave to the lender, what then of nations? Entire countries exist as debtors, beholden to institutions, to other powerful states. The very definition of sovereignty shifts when a nation's economy is shackled by loans it can never truly repay." His finger traced invisible lines across continents. Global debt isn't merely about monetary figures. It's about unparalleled power and control, influencing policies, resources, even destinies. These aren't just invisible chains for you, Ilara. They are the fundamental architecture of our world, and ancient prophecies speak profoundly about them. Ilara's eyes widened, her personal burden suddenly a terrifying microcosm of a global truth. "What few realize, Ilara," Professor Eris continued, picking up a worn, leather-bound Bible, "is that this book, from the earliest pages of Genesis to the sweeping visions of Revelation, speaks profoundly and precisely about money, debt, and economic power. It foretells the patterns, the pitfalls, and the ultimate destiny of these invisible chains. Understanding these ancient texts isn't just an academic exercise. It's the key to truly comprehending the economic realities we face today. It's a roadmap to not only identify the chains, but to understand how they might, one day, be broken." Ilara, though still weighed down by her own numbers, felt a fragile, unfamiliar spark. She was skeptical, yes, but undeniably intrigued. A journey had begun. Professor Eris gestured towards a detailed map of ancient Egypt, his voice resonating with the weight of history. "To truly grasp the invisible chains of today, Ilara, we must journey back to their very genesis. Not just to an abstract concept, but to a tangible story of power, provision, and control. It all begins in the book of Genesis, with a young Hebrew slave named Joseph, thrust into the court of Pharaoh." Ilara leaned forward, captivated. "Joseph? The one who interpreted dreams?" "Precisely," Eris affirmed, a knowing glint in his eye. "Pharaoh had two disturbing dreams. 7 fat cows devoured by 7 lean ones, and 7 full heads of grain swallowed by 7 withered ones. Joseph, guided by God, revealed the chilling truth. 7 years of unparalleled abundance would be followed by 7 years of devastating famine. A cycle of feast and famine, a pattern woven into the very fabric of existence, yet so often ignored. Eris then painted a vivid picture of Joseph's divinely inspired strategy. Joseph's wisdom was not merely to interpret, but to act. He advised Pharaoh to collect a fifth of every harvest during the years of plenty, storing it in vast granaries across the land. Imagine the scale, Ilara, mountains of grain carefully managed, centralizing an unprecedented amount of wealth and resources under Pharaoh's direct control. It was a plan that saved a nation, yes, but it also laid the groundwork for a power structure unlike any seen before. Ilara's brows furrowed. So even a good thing, like saving people from starvation, could create such immense power for one person? Indeed, Eris confirmed, his gaze intense. Foresight, whether for good or ill, invariably creates vast power differentials. Joseph's plan, though born of divine revelation and executed with integrity, centralized Egypt's entire economic future in Pharaoh's hands. The granaries, overflowing with life, became the silent keys to absolute dominion. The calm before the storm, but a storm that would reshape an entire society. The shift was stark. Eris's voice grew somber, his narrative transitioning from foresight to the grim reality of famine. Then, the 7 years of plenty vanished, swallowed by the insatiable jaws of scarcity. The sky turned to brass, the earth to dust. The Nile, once Egypt's lifeblood, dwindled. Across dusty villages, families watched their crops wither, their livestock weaken. Hunger, a silent predator, stalked every home. Visuals of parched land and emaciated figures flickered in Ilara's mind. "What did they do?" she whispered, her voice laced with empathy. "They exhausted everything," Eris explained, his tone heavy. "First, their meager savings, then their remaining possessions. And when all was gone, they turned to the only source of sustenance, Pharaoh's granaries, managed by Joseph. They came, desperate, offering their livestock for food. Then, as the famine deepened, they offered their land, the very ground that sustained their lives and heritage. Finally, with nothing left, they offered themselves." Ilara felt a chill trace down her spine. "They sold themselves?" The words echoed the ancient truth. The borrower is slave to the lender. She saw it clearly now. The raw, human cost of economic collapse. The choices driven by sheer survival. It was a mirror to the relentless desperation that led people today to predatory lenders, trading future freedom for present relief, only to find themselves ensnared in a new form of servitude. The ancient world, it seemed, understood desperation intimately. Eris continued, his voice now a grave pronouncement of history's chilling lesson. "Yes, Ilara, the people cried out to Joseph, 'We and our land are slaves to Pharaoh. Give us food, and we will be servants to Pharaoh.' And so the culmination of economic control was complete. Pharaoh, through Joseph, acquired all the land of Egypt, save that of the priests. The people became his servants, bound to him by the very food that saved their lives. A new societal structure was forged, where land and liberty, once sacred, were entirely lost to the state. Ilara felt a profound unease settle over her. She thought of her own mounting credit card statements, the student loan notifications that flashed on her phone like tiny digital shackles. She might not be literally offering her land or herself to a pharaoh, but wasn't the principle the same? Her labor, her future, a significant portion of her very existence, was already pledged. The freedom she thought she possessed was an illusion, contingent on the benevolence of the system, just as the Egyptians' lives now depended on Pharaoh. "It's a chilling connection," Ilara murmured, more to herself than to Eris. "My debt, their servitude. The invisible chains were forming even then, weren't they?" Pharaoh's consolidation of power through economic means was a blueprint, a precedent for what would happen again and again throughout history. Eris nodded, his gaze distant, as if seeing the millennia unfold before him. Indeed, the borrower became slave to the lender, not just individually, but on a national scale. And for 4 centuries the descendants of Abraham would endure that very slavery in Egypt, until God himself intervened, calling out from a burning bush, demanding the release of his people. Professor Eris turned from the world map, his gaze settling on Ilara, a quiet intensity in his eyes. The dusty shelves of ancient scrolls seemed to hum with forgotten wisdom. "What you witnessed in Egypt," he began, "the gradual descent into servitude through economic control, was the very pattern God sought to break with his chosen people. After the Exodus, after he delivered Israel from literal chains, he didn't just give them a new land. He gave them a new way of living, a covenant designed to prevent the borrower becoming slave to the lender, from ever taking root among them. He gestured towards a heavy, leather-bound volume on his desk, a replica of ancient Hebrew texts. Look here. God instituted two revolutionary economic principles, the Sabbatical year and the year of Jubilee. Concepts so radical they defied every empire's logic. Ilara leaned forward, a flicker of hope in her anxious expression. Debt cancellation? Land return? That sounds almost impossible for any society, let alone an ancient one. Eris nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. Precisely. Every 7 years, a sabbatical. The land was to rest, left fallow. And more astonishing still, all debts owed between Israelites were to be remitted. Wiped clean. Imagine, Ilara, a reset button every 7 years, ensuring no one became perpetually enslaved by debt. Then, every 50 years, the Jubilee. Not only were all debts canceled, but all land that had been sold reverted to its original family, and all indentured servants, those who had sold themselves due to poverty, were set free. It was a system built on grace, on the understanding that true freedom, both spiritual and economic, was paramount. A radical design for liberation. Ilara found herself genuinely surprised, a concept so foreign to her debt-laden reality, yet so profoundly just. The sabbatical year, Eris continued, picking up a smaller scroll, was more than just an economic policy. It was an act of profound faith. For an entire year the fields lay fallow. No sowing, no reaping. How could a nation survive? God promised to bless the 6th year's harvest so abundantly that it would provide for 3 years. This wasn't just about debt remission. It was about trusting in divine provision, breaking the cycle of relentless labor and accumulation. It was a spiritual lesson woven into the very fabric of their economy, a powerful reminder that God was their ultimate provider, not their own frantic striving. He paused, letting the weight of the concept settle. It was designed to prevent generational poverty, to ensure that every family had a chance to start fresh, to prevent wealth from concentrating in the hands of a few. Imagine the peace, Ilara, of knowing that every 7 years the slate was wiped clean. No hidden clauses, no compound interest silently tightening its grip. Just rest, release, and renewed trust. Ilara pictured a family, weary from years of struggle, suddenly free, able to breathe again. A better way indeed. "But the Jubilee," Eris declared, his voice rising with a passionate conviction. "That was the ultimate economic reset. Every 50 years, the trumpet would sound, proclaiming liberty throughout the land. All land returned to its ancestral owners. All those bound by debt, even those who had sold themselves into servitude, were set free to return to their families and their inheritance. This wasn't merely a band-aid. It was a complete societal recalibration. It prevented the permanent accumulation of land by a wealthy few, ensuring that the blessing of inheritance remained distributed. No one could ever truly lose their family's legacy forever. It was a powerful, tangible expression of God's heart for justice, for equality, for ensuring that every member of his covenant community had a fair start, a fresh beginning, a true liberation from the invisible chains of perpetual poverty. Ilara felt a deep ache, a longing for such a radical, compassionate system. Her own persistent student loans, her credit card balance, felt like an endless, unyielding burden. The Jubilee was a dream of what could be, a stark contrast to her current reality. Yet Eris's expression grew somber. But here lies the tragic truth. Despite these divine safeguards, Israel often struggled to faithfully observe the Sabbatical and Jubilee years. They, like many societies, fell prey to greed, to the pursuit of mammon. The wealthy often chose to ignore these laws, accumulating land and binding their brethren in perpetual debt. He shook his head slowly. The consequences were devastating. Economic disparities grew, the poor became poorer, and the nation suffered. The prophets repeatedly warned them that their disobedience, especially their neglect of these vital economic laws, would lead to national judgment, to exile from the very land God had given them. It's a chilling historical echo, Ilara. Ignoring divine principles, neglecting the needs of the vulnerable always leads to suffering. A pattern we see repeated throughout history, and one that, disturbingly, resonates with the invisible chains we witness today. Ilara felt a profound connection, a recognition of that same stubborn human nature that often chooses self-interest over divine wisdom, a loop she recognized in her own world. Professor Eris's office, usually a sanctuary of quiet reflection, now buzzed with the echoes of ancient struggle. He leaned forward, a worn copy of Nehemiah open on his desk. After the exiles returned to Jerusalem, Eris began, his voice taking on a narrative cadence. They faced the monumental task of rebuilding their devastated city. But as Nehemiah arrived, a new, insidious enemy had taken root not outside the walls, but within their own community. Ilara listened intently, a flicker of recognition in her eyes. Their own people, the wealthy among them, were exploiting the poor. Families were mortgaging their fields, vineyards, even their children, just to buy grain and pay taxes. They were becoming slaves, not to a foreign king, but to their own brethren. Eris recounted Nehemiah's righteous fury, his demand for justice, his decree that the seized lands be returned, and the usurious interest remitted. Ilara felt a surge of inspiration. He actually stood up to them, she murmured, picturing the ancient leader breaking the invisible chains of his time. He showed them that true community couldn't be built on exploitation. Eris nodded gravely. Indeed, Nehemiah understood a fundamental biblical principle, the grave danger of interest, or usury, especially when charged to a fellow countryman in need. He explained how the Mosaic Law had strict prohibitions against such practices, not as a mere financial regulation, but as a safeguard against perpetual poverty and social stratification. When interest accumulates, it doesn't just grow, it compounds, creating a burden that can never truly be lifted, binding generations to the original debt. Ilara felt a cold dread creep over her. Her student loan statements, with their relentlessly compounding interest, flashed through her mind. What had started as a means to freedom had become her own invisible chain, tightening with every passing month. The ancient warning, intended to protect a vulnerable community, now felt chillingly relevant to her modern struggle. And this principle, Eris continued, gesturing towards a large historical map unfurled behind him, extends far beyond individuals. Empires, both ancient and modern, have mastered the art of using debt as a tool of conquest and control. He traced the expansion of ancient Babylon and Persia, explaining how they didn't always conquer with swords alone, but by economic dominance, offering aid that created client states, forever indebted and dependent. Think of modern geopolitics. Eris pressed, his gaze piercing. Loans offered with conditions, development aid that comes with strategic strings attached, creating a web of dependency that can be more binding than any physical occupation. Ilara's personal struggle suddenly felt minuscule, yet connected. The invisible chains weren't just around her, but around entire nations, subtly dictating their destinies. The borrower is slave to the lender resonated with an unsettling, global power. Professor Eris shifted, a new solemnity settling over his cluttered office. The air, thick with the scent of old paper and quiet contemplation, seemed to deepen as he began. We've seen the ancient patterns, Ilara, the cycles of gain and loss, but Jesus, in his wisdom, lifted the veil even further. showing us that these invisible chains aren't just economic, they are profoundly spiritual. He recounted the parable of the unforgiving servant. A servant owed his king an unpayable sum, 10,000 talents, a debt so vast it represented not just financial ruin, but a lifetime of servitude. Yet the king, moved by compassion, forgave the impossible debt. Ilara listened, her eyes wide, imagining such boundless mercy. But the story took a dark turn. That same forgiven servant, free from his crushing burden, immediately seized a fellow servant who owed him a mere 100 denarii, a pittance in comparison, and had him thrown into prison until the small debt was paid. Ilara felt a jolt. The king's righteous wrath, when he learned of the unforgiving servant's cruelty, resonated deeply with her own indignation. This wasn't just about money, it was about the heart, about mercy, and the chilling spiritual weight of what we owe and what we refuse to forgive. Later, walking through the city's neon street canyons, Ilara's mind replayed the parable. The streetlights blurred into streaks as she pondered its unsettling truth. She felt the heavy burden of her own credit card statements, her student loans, the relentless demands that had become her invisible chains. But then, a new, uncomfortable realization began to dawn. If she was a debtor, wasn't she also, in some ways, a creditor? Not of money, perhaps, but of grievances. The sharp word from a colleague, the forgotten promise from a friend, the small slights that she nursed in silence. Hadn't she, too, held debts against others, refusing to release them? The anger, the resentment, the quiet judgments she carried, were these not her own small, unforgiven sums? A profound question surfaced from the depths of her soul. Was her own inability to extend mercy, to truly forgive, somehow contributing to the feeling of being trapped, to the tightening of her own invisible chains? The thought was both painful and liberating. Back in Professor Eris's office, the conversation deepened. Jesus was explicit, Ilara, Eris stated, his voice firm yet compassionate. He warned, you cannot serve both God and mammon. He paused, allowing the words to sink in. Mammon isn't just money. It's the spirit of covetousness, the idolization of material wealth and security. It's the driving force behind the endless pursuit of more, the subtle lure of freedom that consumerism promises but never truly delivers. Eris explained that much of modern debt, Ilara's included, arose from this very pursuit, the desire for things, experiences, or status that mammon whispers are essential. It was a servitude not to a king, but to an insatiable appetite. Ilara saw it, her own yearning for a bigger apartment, the latest tech, the elusive feeling of keeping up. The insidious nature of it was that mammon promised liberation, but delivered a different kind of servitude, binding you with invisible chains to the very things you believed would set you free. The choice, Eris concluded, was stark, a master of mercy or a master of materialism. Professor Eris's office, usually bathed in the soft glow of lamplight, now felt shadowed, a palpable urgency hanging in the air. He turned a page in a well-worn Bible, his expression grave. We've traced these invisible chains from ancient Egypt to the heart of Israel's laws, even to the teachings of Christ, Eris began, his voice dropping to a near whisper. But the Bible doesn't just tell us about the past or the present. It foretells the ultimate manifestation of these chains in one of the darkest passages of Revelation. Ilara leaned forward, a shiver running down her spine as Eris's finger landed on a verse. He read with solemn weight, asterisk, and he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand, or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. Numbers. A cold dread settled over Ilara. The vague anxieties of digital identification and cashless societies she dismissed as conspiracy whispers now coalesced into a terrifying global reality. The invisible chains, it seemed, were destined to become visible, inescapable. Consider the trajectory we are on, Eris continued. gesturing towards a screen now displaying articles about emerging technologies. Central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs, are no longer theoretical. Digital IDs, linked to every aspect of our lives, are being piloted in nations across the globe. Cashless societies are celebrated as convenient, efficient. But what happens when the power to control these systems falls into the wrong hands? What happens when access to the digital marketplace, to buying and selling, becomes contingent upon compliance with a singular overarching authority? Ilara's mind raced, connecting the dots. The news headlines, once abstract, now resonated with a chilling, terrifying precision. It wasn't a distant prophecy anymore. It was the blueprint unfolding, quietly, before their very eyes. The convenience promised by technology, she realized, could very well be the velvet glove concealing the ultimate iron fist of control. Eris turned back to Ilara, his gaze direct, piercing. Many speak of a global financial reset, a restructuring of the world's economic order. If such a reset were to create a fully centralized, interconnected financial system, where every transaction, every identity, every resource is monitored and controlled by a singular authority, it would represent the ultimate, invisible chain. He paused, letting the gravity of his words sink in. It would be a system designed to enforce total conformity, where dissent means economic disenfranchisement, where non-compliance means the inability to participate in society itself. Ilara felt a profound, aching urgency. Her personal struggle with debt, the quiet anxiety she lived with daily, was not just hers. It was a microcosm, a faint echo of a much larger, darker prophetic tapestry being woven for the entire world. The future stakes, she now understood, were enormous. The air in Professor Eris's office grew heavy with a contemplative silence, a stark contrast to the preceding discussions of global digital systems. Eris leaned forward, his gaze piercing, as if seeing beyond the present moment. We've seen the grand prophecies, Ilara, the sweeping judgments. But Jesus, the master storyteller, often used parables to unveil truths far deeper than mere transactions, truths about the eternal consequences of our economic choices. He began to recount the story of the rich man and Lazarus. There was a certain rich man, Eris narrated, his voice painting vivid pictures, clothed in purple and fine linen, who feasted sumptuously every day. Ilara could almost smell the spices, hear the laughter of banquets. But at his gate lay a poor man named Lazarus, full of sores, desiring to be fed with the crumbs which fell from the rich man's table. Ilara pictured the beggar, starved and ignored, just beyond the ornate gates of luxury. The rich man's sin wasn't malice, but a devastating indifference. He had all the economic freedom in the world, yet his spirit was enslaved by self-indulgence. Ilara felt a chill. The parable underscored a terrifying truth. Economic freedom without compassion could be the most dangerous chain of all, binding not just hands, but the very soul. Later, Ilara walked through a sprawling city park, the vibrant greens and distant laughter feeling incongruous with the weight of Eris's words. She passed gleaming skyscrapers, symbols of immense wealth, then noticed a figure huddled under a bridge, a stark and immediate echo of Lazarus. The great divide was not confined to ancient parables. It was here, now, painted across the urban landscape. Her own debt, her struggles, suddenly felt less about personal misfortune and more about a pervasive spirit of self-focus. Had her own consumption habits, her relentless pursuit of material comfort, the very promises of modern credit, blinded her to the needs around her? Had the invisible chains of consumerism, which she so desperately wanted to break, also kept her from true generosity, from seeing the suffering at her own metaphorical gate? A profound, uncomfortable sense of personal responsibility began to emerge, a silent, internal reckoning. Returning to Professor Eris's office, Ilara found a quiet determination settling within her. "Ilara," Eris began, his tone now infused with a profound hope that still carried the gravity of eternal choices. "While these earthly economic chains are powerful, God's ultimate concern is always for the soul's eternal freedom." He gestured towards a simple wooden cross on his wall. "True wealth, the kind that transcends any market crash or global reset, lies not in accumulation, but in a vibrant relationship with God and unwavering compassion for others. Ilara felt a profound shift. Her journey wasn't just about managing her credit card statements or understanding prophetic timelines. It was about a deeper spiritual relationship, a realignment of her entire life. Breaking the invisible chains was not merely a financial battle. It was, she realized, a spiritual war for her soul, for her eternal destiny. Professor Aris's office felt different now, imbued with a lighter, almost sacred atmosphere. The ancient texts still lined the shelves, but Ilara no longer saw them as symbols of overwhelming complexity. They were keys. Aris, leaning forward, his gaze steady, began to speak of a truth so counterintuitive it challenged every modern financial lesson Ilara had ever learned. "Ilara," he began, "the world teaches us to hoard, to accumulate, to protect our resources at all costs. But the Bible reveals a paradoxical truth. True freedom from mammon's grip often begins with releasing what we cling to. It's the principle of tithing, of generous giving, not as a burden, but as an act of profound faith." He explained how this act, this releasing of control over one's finances, invited God's supernatural provision, actively breaking the spirit of greed that often fueled debt. Ilara listened, skepticism warring with a dawning hope. It felt radical, revolutionary even, but as Aris spoke, she began to see the spiritual logic, a glimmer of a path to breaking her own invisible chains. Inspired, Ilara returned to her cramped apartment, but it no longer felt like a cage. A new resolve settled within her. She began to declutter, not just her space, but her entire approach to living. This wasn't just about saving money, it was about cultivating contentment. Each item she donated, each unnecessary subscription she canceled, felt like a link in a chain snapping. "Why did I think I needed all this?" she mused, sorting through clothes she barely wore. "This pursuit of more, it only pushed me deeper into debt." She consciously chose trust over consumerism, opting for simple joys, home-cooked meals, and walks in the park over impulse buys. Slowly, subtly, the gnawing anxiety that had been her constant companion began to recede, replaced by a quiet, determined peace. Her budget spreadsheet, once a source of dread, now showed small, positive changes, a testament to a shifting heart. Back in Aris's office, a simple wooden cross, previously unnoticed by Ilara, now seemed to radiate quiet power. Aris fixed his gaze on it. "While our efforts, our wisdom, and our discipline are crucial, Ilara," he affirmed, "we must never forget the ultimate source of freedom. All these invisible chains, economic, spiritual, emotional, find their true breaking point in Christ's sacrifice." His voice deepened, filled with conviction. Jesus broke the chains of sin and death itself, offering a liberation that transcends any earthly bondage. Your journey isn't just about managing debt. It's about a deeper eternal relationship with the one who paid the ultimate price. Ilara looked at the cross, then at Aris, a profound understanding washing over her. Her financial struggle, her anxieties, her search for freedom, it all led back to this, to a spiritual deliverance far greater than she had ever imagined. Later, as the city lights began to twinkle against the canvas of a hopeful sunset, Ilara and Professor Aris stood together, looking out over the sprawling metropolis. A quiet understanding passed between them. "I still have a long way to go," Ilara admitted, a genuine smile gracing her lips. "But I don't feel enslaved anymore. I feel empowered by truth." Aris nodded, his wise eyes reflecting the city's glow. "That is the beginning of true freedom, Ilara. To understand God's wisdom is to find a path out of any labyrinth. And this journey is not yours alone. For all who seek His truth, the way to break these invisible chains is open." They stood in silent contemplation, the city below no longer a symbol of overwhelming pressures, but a landscape filled with possibilities for divine intervention, for lives transformed, one truth, one heart at a time. "Do you feel the invisible chains of debt in your life?" Echoing the ancient prophecy, The borrower is slave to the lender. We are living in times when these profound biblical truths are more alive than ever, manifesting in our personal lives and on the global stage. Where do you stand in this story? Do you recognize the subtle yet powerful grip of these economic chains? Leave your thoughts and experiences in the comment box below. And if you'd like us to keep exploring how current events and our personal struggles connect with biblical prophecy and God's path to freedom, give this video a thumbs up and share it. This lets us know we should continue uncovering more prophecies unfolding right before our eyes. And if you're ready to dive even deeper, click right now on the video you see on your screen. Discover the prophetic keys to breaking free from the spirit of mammon. In these times, understanding is more essential than ever. Blessings.